Our conversation here today is guided, it's going to be, joined by really amazing academics and activists and people that are at the front lines of struggles. And the conversation today is also going to be guided by Joy Ayoub, who is a Lebanese writer, researcher, podcaster, and editor. Previously a MENA editor at Global Voices and Effects. He's doing his PhD on post-war Lebanon at the University of Zurich. He's also the host of The Fire These Times, a podcast dedicated to the tasks of tackling the 21st century from periphery. His work covers everything from cultural studies to human rights, futurism, and the climate emergency. And we're just so honored to have you here and to have you guide the conversation today. So over to you, Joy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tatiana. So I am going to start by introducing the four guests that we have here. We have 2 Syrians, 2 Ukrainians, which is a perfect ratio, I think, for this conversation. I will ask if it's okay, all speakers to speak as slowly as they can to give time for our interpreters. The team has done an amazing job getting 5 different languages at the same time. I have no idea how they managed to do this, but they did. If those listening want to listen to this conversation in any of the other languages, please check out the language button at the bottom right, I guess, for the other languages: English, Ukrainian, Russian, Spanish, and Arabic, those 5 languages. And okay, so I'm going to start by introducing our 4 panelists. Yassin al-Haj Saleh, who will be speaking in English, is a Syrian writer and former political prisoner. He is the author of several books on Syria, prison, contemporary Islam, intellectual responsibility, and experiences of the atrocious, quote unquote. He is the husband of Samira al-Khalil, who was abducted by an armed Islamist group in Douma in December 2013. He now lives in Berlin, and links to his essays by Yassin can be found in the chat at some point in this conversation for those who are interested. Our second speaker, Wafa Mustafa, who will also be speaking in English. She's a Syrian activist, a journalist, a survivor from detention. Mustafa comes from Maysaf, a city in the Hama Governorate in Western Syria. She left the country on the 9th of July, 2013, exactly a week after her father was forcibly disappeared by the regime in Damascus. In her advocacy, Mustafa covers the impact of detention on young girls and women and families, and a profile of Wafa can be found in the chat box as well for those who want later. Our third speaker will be Yulia Yurchenko, who will also be speaking in English. She is a senior lecturer in political economy at the Department of Economics and International Business, and a researcher at the Political Economy, Governance, Finance, and Accountability Institute at the University of Greenwich, UK. She is the author of Ukraine and the Empire of Capital, which was published by Pluto in 2017. She researches state, capital, and society relations, as well as public services, and commons with a regional focus on Europe and Ukraine. Again, everything I mentioned, any relevant links, we'll post them throughout the conversation. And finally, Taras Bilus, who will be speaking in Ukrainian. He is a Ukrainian historian and an activist of the social movement organization. As an editor for Commons, a journal of social critique, he covers the topics of war and nationalism. He has written recently quite a lot of articles, including a letter to the Western left from Kyiv, as well as The Left in the West Must Rethink. To get us started, I will ask Yassin first, if that's okay, and then Wafa. So we start with Syrians and then we go to Ukrainians. We do it 50-50 as a start. If you can talk to us about what is happening in Syria and what's been happening in Syria, and obviously feel free to start where you want to start. I know this is a big ask and it's a big question. And after that, we'll go on with Wafa to maybe focus on more recent events as well. Yassin, you're muted.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, everybody, for organizing this amazing event. I think it is really vital now that we can meet and talk about issues to network and to find connections between our struggles in different parts of the world. So I feel actually a bit prehistoric here, because as I see, most of the people here are very young. I mean, yeah, 30s or some younger, so I feel quite a grandpa. But maybe I have a merit of being involved in the struggles in Syria for democracy, for social justice, for human dignity, for quite a long time. Joy, I tend to be quick in talking, so please stop me when I exaggerate a bit. So when I was very young, I was a political prisoner for quite a good time, all my 20s and more than half of my 30s. It was the first wave of struggle for democracy and for change. So our struggle for owning our country, for retrieving our country, didn't start today or some 11 years ago. It started at least since the second half of 1970s, a few years after al-Assad came to power. And he, as maybe you know, we have now a dynasty. He ruled the country 30 years, and then his son ruled the country for 20 years. So the second wave, an even bigger one, started in 2011. It started as a peaceful demonstration of people in many parts of the country for democracy and for justice and for dignity. Actually, the idea of dignity was loomed very large in the Syrian struggle. It was faced by war from the very first moment from the side of the regime. People were arrested, tortured, and killed. Demonstrations, I mean, just a few days after the beginning, dozens of demonstrators, or there was a sit-in in a certain place in Daraa were killed by the, not by police, by the military formations led by Maher al-Assad, the brother of Bashar al-Assad. So then it turned to a peaceful and military struggle. For almost 2 years, it was Syrian versus Syrian struggle. It was our struggle against a cliquish regime, oligarchic, and extremely brutal. Then actually the national setting of struggle collapsed, and it became a regional thing with many regional powers involved and many international powers. I'll not talk much. I mean, maybe if we want to give a clear idea, I'm afraid most of the listeners here will feel lost in details. So I'll try just to give some outlines. So after the collapse of the national setting, the Syrian versus Syrian struggle, there were many regional and international powers, and there were many massacres with WMD, especially chemical weapons. You know that there was a big chemical massacre in suburbs around Damascus, with one of them, August 21, 2013, more than 1,400 people were killed. At the same time, there was a rise of some nihilistic Islamic groups. I call them nihilistic because they negate the whole world. They negate actually the Syrian society itself. And most of their struggle was against Syrians fighting. Some of them fought the regime, but they fought against Syrians who were fighting the regime, especially Daesh and Al-Qaeda. The Americans intervened in Syria in 2000, 2014. The Russians intervened a year later in 2015. The Turks even a year later, 2016. Iranians were intervening from the very beginning through their satellites in Lebanon, from Lebanon and Iraq and Afghanistan, and sectarianizing the struggle. Manipulating the cultural, religious divisions within the Syrian society. Israel was intervening all the time, and Israel occupies Syrian territory since 1967, Golan Heights. So we have I don't think that we have many examples that are similar to Syria, where you have 5 regional and international powers at the same time in one country, and many sub-state actors. I mentioned the Lebanese Hezbollah, many Shia groups from Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the infiltration of Sunni jihadism after the collapse of the national setting of the struggle. So it is a global thing. At the same time, almost 7 million of Syrians have been displaced outside the country, which is 30% of the population. So we have the world in Syria, so to speak, and we have the Syrians scattered in 127 countries, mostly in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Germany, then Iraq and Egypt. But according to Human Rights Watch, Syrian refugees are scattered in 127 countries. So now it is, we have 4 Syrias, or 5 actually. The one dominated by the regime, it is the Assadi Protectorate, protected by Russia and Iran. Then we have an enclave in Idlib, dominated by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is sort of an offshoot of al-Qaeda. Then a strip of the northern borders of Syria, occupied by Turkey, though through Syrian proxies. Then there's a region in the east dominated by the Americans, and the boots on land are mostly Kurds from Syria and from neighboring countries, from Turkey specifically, and of course the Golan Heights. So we have almost 5 Syrias, and we have Syrians everywhere in the world. I don't think that we know many examples like this. The human toll was huge. According to the UN, some 2 months ago, or a bit than 2 months ago, a speaker said that 350,000 killed, and she emphasized that the real number is most probably far bigger. My personal estimation is between 500,000 and 600,000, which is more than 1 among every 40 Syrians. Syrians are 23, 24 millions, or were 23 to 24 millions. We have more than 100,000 of people forcibly disappeared. We don't know about their fates. It happens that Wafa's father is one of them, my wife, my brother, many of my friends are among them. So it is a big tragedy on the human level. It is a big, reducing a whole country to a situation that we, to almost a situation that we don't know how to understand it well, how to analyze it well. And I think one of the features of our struggle is that many people say complicated over there in Syria, and this is true. It is, but it is not. It is analyzable, and the one main thing in analyzing is to talk about the complicators. When there is a big chemical massacre, and instead of punishing the criminal, you take the tool of crime, and you don't take it. Actually, they didn't take it. It was a farcical application of international law. Then things will become really complex, and they became complex after this. Yeah, I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Yassin. Thank you for this. Wafa, do you want to pick it up from there?
Yes. So good evening, everyone from Berlin. I think Yassin covered a part from what I was preparing to say, but I'll still just give some more numbers and facts. So as Yassin mentioned, I mean, first and foremost, most importantly, when it comes to Syria and when it comes to numbers, there has been many estimations from different entities regarding the numbers of deaths and detainees and those forcibly disappeared. And I think this is the most difficult aspect of the situation in Syria. Obviously, we heard many numbers reaching, 1 million of victims killed in Syria. But I mean, this is part of the tragedy that no one actually knows, and no one can actually tell. After 11 years, it's still very difficult for any party or any organization or any political entity to come up with the real numbers. But at least we know that, as Yassin said, more than half of Syria's population has been fled Syria, and at least the number I guess now is approaching 7 million people who are internally displaced, and 2 million of them are actually staying in camps, intended camps with limited access, obviously, to basic services. And as Yassin also said, the biggest number of refugees outside Syria are staying in neighboring countries, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq. But as for February this year, it was said that 14 million Syrians inside Syria were in need of humanitarian assistance, and this is according to the UN. And about 5 million are classified as being in extreme and catastrophic need, and more than 12 million are struggling to find enough food each day. I mean, I usually do not really speak numbers, but I know today that we have a very diverse audience. I know, and I also know that we all don't really like numbers. But I think to give an overview, I mean, these numbers are huge. And obviously, I mean, each of us have families still in Syria. And when I say more than 12 million people are struggling to find enough food, I know that because my family is one of these families. And I know that because my friends and people who I grew up with call me sometimes to say that we are very embarrassed, but could you please support, because we spent the last week with no food. And this is unfortunately the reality. And I mean, talking about education, unfortunately, became some kind of luxury in Syria, not only because a huge part of schools in Syria were destroyed, actually targeted, not only randomly destroyed, they were targeted by the regime and by the Russian airstrikes, but also because many families were for the sake of their children's safety, did not send them to schools for years. I mean, it's this when we talk about destruction, you know, whole cities are destructed in Syria. Aleppo is a very clear and unfortunately very similar to what we are now seeing in Ukraine. And it's heartbreaking. Talking about hospitals, I mean, according to Physicians for Human Rights, it's said that we reached a point where only half of Syria's health facilities are functioning. I mean, I just want to, unfortunately, I have to come to the point where we talk about negotiations. After 11 years, everything failed. Countless rounds of negotiations, organized and supported by everyone we can imagine. They all failed. Last thing we had was an invitation to form, to actually write a constitution, which many Syrians did not actually support, but I think it started like a couple of years ago, and recently last year, Geir Pedersen said that it's a huge disappointment. But I think, I mean, to me, it's most importantly, I mean, at least this is the overview, but when it comes to daily life, even for us, like those who live in exile, I've been living in Germany for now 6 years, but my daily reality is Syria and is about Syria. And as this is something that many people who live in exile say, that I am physically here, but I'm mentally and emotionally still in Syria. Not only because because this is the country, as Yassin explained beautifully, this is the country that I belong to, and this is the country that I fought for, but mainly also because my father is still there somewhere. So my father has been forcibly disappeared by the Assad regime today for 3,208 days, and that makes 8 years, 9 months and 12 days. So, and that means that we don't even know if he's alive or not. And this is what enforced disappearance means in Syria. No phone calls, no letters, no communication. Families like mine are actually tortured by the regime by spending the rest of their lives just wondering if their loved ones are still alive or not. And if they are not, why they were killed, where are they buried? And yeah, I think this is one of the things that I am mostly concerned with. And I think also, I mean, the footage from Ukraine, everything we've been seeing is just heartbreaking. It's, to be honest, I'm mostly disappointed because I did not wish that to happen for anyone else. I wish that the world didn't let us down, but they did. So I'm here today, and I'm very honored, but I am also very, I don't know, I feel, for some reason, I feel ashamed. I should not be, because I am not the international community. I did not fail anyone. And I am fighting with all my power, but I think I still feel ashamed because just before this conversation, I was looking at images and footage and videos from Ukraine, and I just feel helpless. So I hope this conversation today will inform all of us, but will also bring us more, closer.
Thank you, Wafa. I think I speak for everyone saying that you're not the one who should be ashamed in such a context. And both Yassin and Wafa, thanks a lot for, it's impossible to summarize and even explain in a few minutes the past 50 years, essentially. So I think your interventions were fantastic. If I can now move on to Yulia, if that's okay, to obviously focusing on recent events and ongoing events, but if you can also give us some context to those who don't know in the audiences. And I will ask you a very broad question, like what is happening in Ukraine, so that you can, have the floor to answer as you want. And then we'll go to Taras, of course.
Thank you very much. Well, it's always, I normally at events that I go to in my line of work as an academic and an occasional activist. I like to follow after others have spoken, because you can layer on top of what others have said. And in a sense, that is also true here, but at the same time, it is more difficult because you hear these heartbreaking stories, and of course, you know it from the news and you hear personal accounts, but there is something quite different happening to you when you're even in a virtual space with people who have endured it personally. And in that sense, you kind of, you prepare certain things to say, and then you don't know if it's even is relevant anymore. And my heart goes out to you and your families in your country. It's horrific. Years of suffering, absolutely horrific. What is happening in Ukraine, and I'm glad that we're having this event of support and solidarity with our friends and comrades from Syria, because we see so many horrifying similarities in what is going on. We see is the betrayal of those who you hope to find amongst your comrades in these difficult times. And I think Taras has written about it before, and we talk about it a lot. Horrendous suffering of people, destruction of cities, kidnappings, murder, torture, the whole lot. And when you on top of dealing with all of that and trying to find some support for humanitarian and military needs of the country that are so dire, you also have to fight those who are doubting what is going on in your country. And I'm not talking about people from Kremlin propaganda. I'm talking about people on the kind of who call themselves hardcore Western left or whatever they are. And that I find to be one of the most difficult things, because it makes you feel very lonely and very sad. Because if you do not support the liberation struggle of those who are being aggressively destroyed, then what's happening, right? And what we've seen in Ukraine, we hear a lot that, oh, this is inter-imperialistic struggle, and you've heard that, I'm sure, that this is all about these big powers fighting over, and your land and your people are just a pawn. Well, yes, that's blatantly obvious, but there is so much more to this story. Where are the individuals? Where is their agency, their subjectivity? Where are their stories? Where are their desires? Where are their dreams? Where are their lives? Like what has to die inside of you to look at images of burned and destroyed and mutilated bodies and say that it has been all staged? This is, some sort of cinema production to justify some sort of fascist regime in Ukraine. And that I find on a personal level the most difficult thing to deal with. And I do not wish that on anybody, and I know that you've gone through that yourself and you still go through that so much, like the disbelief of the disbelief into the eyewitness stories. Like what kind of self-interest does a person whose house has been bombed have in blaming or framing somebody else? This is just it. I cannot believe that this is what we're dealing with. But I want to, on a more not abstract, but kind of broader level, I want to speak to two things that I find are quite pertinent in this kind of narrative framing of what's going on in Ukraine. And I think that there is a lot of that litter that we need to get out of the international discourse altogether. So we have been hearing a lot about this. I've already spoken to this kind of inter-imperialistic contact, but of course, there is if we are to have a left analysis of what is going on, we need to be looking at people, we need to be looking at social groups, and we need to be looking at classes. We need to be asking ourselves, where is the labor? Where are the capitalist interests? How are certain narratives being manipulated, and who is benefiting from it? Right? And it's not to look for some conspiracies or anything of the kind, but to actually understand what is going on and who we need to be supporting. And I think, you know, when we start asking those questions, then we also have to kind of go back to the roots of what the left solidarity is supposed to be. You need to study the material, see who is on the ground and who is fighting for their self-preservation and who is fighting to exceed their either financial interests or territorial interests or something of the kind. And I've written about that in my book as well, that, you know, there are competing imperialistic powers, but at the end of the day, we live now in the world that is taken by the empire of capital, where there are different powers of fighting for, like, not so much powers, but kind of classes by proxy of different states and armies are fighting for spheres of interest, as Russians like to call them. And what we end up with is that there are fewer and fewer options for alternative world order, alternative politics that is left for any groups that are trying to challenge that. And then anytime you try to break away from that, you get labeled as some sort of opportunistic group, and that is quite toxic, I find. So in the of course, you know, there are certain class interests of various fractions of capitalist class who will try to manipulate certain groups and voting behaviors and the rest of it, but it doesn't negate the individual interest and agency of people who end up being exploited in the process. And centering that, I think, is very important for everybody. We've heard a lot about legitimizing narratives in Russia, coming from Russia, that they had some sort of security concerns as a pretext for their invasion. And it's not the first invasion, of course, but the latest invasion on the 24th of February, which is, of course, a pure fabrication. But it has been in the making for some time. It didn't come from nowhere. There is no evidence that Ukraine was going to invade Russia. It's a complete fabrication, nor is it, or was it, logical for Ukraine to do so. It would have never won. I mean, this just doesn't make any sense. Instead, Russia kept amassing troops on Ukraine's border for years, and especially since Zelensky became president, because Putin saw him as weak and believed that he saw that Zelensky naively thought that negotiations will get you anywhere. Well, you do not negotiate with somebody who has new imperialistic ambitions around you. And we've tried 8 years of communications and negotiations. It simply doesn't work. Putin only recognizes hard power. And with those who has that power, he may negotiate, but that also is not guaranteed, as we can see now with these, you know, some sort of agonizing gestures towards NATO and France and the United States and the rest of it. Russia's invaded Ukraine 8 years ago. We're in the 9th year of it now. It has been infiltrating the local population and sending sleeper agents in the preparation for Ruski Mir and Novorossiya project for years before that. Russian TV propaganda channels and political technologists have been fabricating this narrative that negates Ukraine's national, linguistic, and cultural identity as separate from Russia for decades. Russia may have some concerns, as they do say, but those are mainly about losing control over and access to Ukraine's economy and the Black Sea deep water port, Sevastopol, as they said in 2014. But those are neo-imperialistic concerns, not security concerns. And having negotiations around that is completely ridiculous. And what we see now is that mask of pretend concerns and diplomacy and this kind of brotherhood has slipped altogether. We see that there's been an evolution of this narrative of freeing Russian speakers from supposed Nazis who staged a coup in Ukraine in 2014 and eventually sort of build some sort of anti-Russian Banderite regime, which again is a complete fabrication. We have seen, yes, of course, there are some right-wing elements in the country. There are some battalions that have been more Nazi and then they kind of mellowed. That's undeniable. But to say that Ukraine is overrun by kind of far-right parties, well, let's look at the French election a few days ago. Imagine if an equivalent of Le Pen's party gathered as many votes as it did in Ukraine, what kind of narrative would that have been? Like, the right-wing parties have never had nearly that level of success. They actually, electorally speaking, they have lost support of population after the first invasion. So we need to be having these kind of, I think, sometimes, complex and also contradictory narrative. Like, there is no such thing as pure protest, pure revolutions. Everybody agrees, everybody carries the red banner, and we're going to be building communism, and that's the only revolution we can support. It never happened, and I doubt it ever will. And that kind of ridiculous non sequitur naivety of some on the left internationally really baffles me. It really does. Like, when we hear narratives about denying Ukrainians weapons to defend their country from Russian aggression on the basis that there is Azov battalion in Mariupol, I mean, like, what did people in Bucha do, or in Sumy, or in Kharkiv? So they deserve to be annihilated because there are some nasty people in the country, and it simply doesn't make any sense to me. So these kind of, like, we need to be thinking about how to, in terms of building international solidarities, we need to be doing this very difficult work of tackling these nonsensical narratives that deny that, together with under the blanket of their anti-Americanism and anti-NATO sentiments, which a lot of are very fair, let's be honest, but there is more to the story than that. Like, you cannot use your anti-Americanism and anti-NATO sentiments to justify denying weapons to Ukrainians to defend themselves, or Syrians for that matter, right? It absolutely doesn't make sense. There were a couple of cases of trade unionists, in Greece and in Italy, refusing to load weapons that were directed to Ukraine, and that was paraded as some sort of heroic deed because they were risking their jobs. And it's like, you know what, keep your jobs. Like, we do not need solidarity like that. And then when last Saturday, there was a demo organized by Ukraine Solidarity Campaign, which I'm a part of, and I'm also part of Syrian and Ukraine together with Taras. There was a demo in London with the support of the biggest unions in the country. And that demo was supported by Syrian and Ukraine from Ukraine, and it was supported by the Confederation of the Free Trade Unions of Ukraine. All the text and the slogans were agreed. And the attacks on that we saw from some of the so-called leftists in social media and in their own publications has been absolutely outrageous. It's like, so what, these workers don't have the ideas you like them to have, so you will not defend them. It really is quite something else. So I think, to me, in terms of healing and going forward, because I do not, I realize I've been speaking for a while. We need to be building solidarities, not least through listening to each other and allowing those who are fighting tell their story, not projecting some 100-year-old templates of what we expect certain things to look like. Do what historical materialists are supposed to do, study the material, then develop your bloody theory. Do not go with your theory book where you don't even speak the language and you've never stepped your foot before. That is something, amplifying the voices of those who are in the middle of the fight, those who have suffered, asking people what life they want to live and then helping them to build it. This is what we need to be doing together. And I agree with the general sentiment of this event, being careful with each other, being mindful of each other's trauma and suffering, listening. And if we sometimes overstep certain boundaries, apologizing and asking how to take it further ahead. This is the kind of left. This is the kind of solidarity that we need to be building, and only then I think we have a fighting chance at tackling this hydra of capitalist interests that are ripping apart our world in their greed for destroying our planet and our societies and families and our gardens and our homes, just so that a few more bucks can be made. So let's build those, and I'm really happy that we're making these connections today. Thank you so much for inviting me and for listening.
Thank you so much, Julia. Okay, finally, Taras, please, and just a reminder just for later, if you can speak just a bit slower for our interpreters. So far it seems to be okay, but just in case. Taras, go for it.
Да, добрий день. Дуже дякую організаторам за запрошення і за організацію цієї зустрічі. І велике спасибі перекладачам. Я співчуваю, що їм зараз, я так розумію, доведеться робити подвійний переклад ще й на інші мови. Мені важко уявити, як це буде. От. І я, перш за все, я би хотів подякувати всім сирійцям, які висловили підтримку за ці 1,5 місяці війни. І Україну багато хто підтримав у світі. Були величезні демонстрації, але те, що люди, які перебувають в настільки скрутному становищі, теж висловлюють з нами солідарність, було, мабуть, найбільш зворушливим. Я не знаю, я теж в ситуації, коли я готувався говорити одне, а зараз, якщо чесно, я не впевнений, що саме розказувати. Ну, оскільки Ясін і Вафа, вони дали такий більш історичний контекст, я може теж тоді додам, що в чомусь там наші історії схожі, просто у нас все якоюсь мірою почалося з Майдану в 2013 році, який був, в принципі, теж частиною тієї хвилі масових протестів у світі, що і арабська весна, і сирійська революція, зокрема. Але нам пощастило в цьому плані більше. У нас Майдан переміг, на відміну від сирійської революції. Режим Януковича було повалено. Але одразу після повалення режиму Януковича ми зіткнулися з російською агресією. І насправді тоді вперше, скільки це 8 років тому, я пам'ятаю моменти, коли ми боялися, що можливо російські танки будуть йти на Київ. На щастя, тоді Росія обмежилася анексією Криму і вторгненням на Донбас. Власне, обмежилася втручанням у найбільш проросійські регіони України. Україна, це окрема тема для розмови. Україна, може, не настільки різноманітна країна, як Сирія, але протягом, з моменту здобуття незалежності, фактично, вона була поляризована між проросійськими і проукраїнськими, прозахідними силами. І насправді, з одного боку, українці дуже часто, нам часто не подобається те, як це спрощено подається в західних ЗМІ, там конфлікт між україномовними і російськомовними чи щось подібне, бо ми всі знаємо, що тут реальність набагато складніша. Це ніколи не був етнічний конфлікт, це не вистачає навіть теоретичної рамки, як описати цей конфлікт цей регіональний розкол в Україні. От. Але у нас була ця реальність, і тоді 8 років тому Росія анексувала Крим, єдиний регіон в Україні, де, власне, росіяни складали більшість, але який насправді теж був включений в російську, ну колись Російська імперія в 18 столітті його захопила, і кримські татари, які є корінним народом Криму, протягом століть систематично витіснялися, і цей півострів заселявся росіянами. І почалась війна на Донбасі, яка теж якби дуже це окремо складна історія, якби про співвідношення якби між втручанням Росії і її роль в розпалюванні цієї війни, і внутрішніх чинників, без яких
Зв'язок пропав, Тарас.
А я не знаю, як так вийшло. А в який момент пропав?
Буквально секунди 5 назад.
Окей, добре. Да, я може останнє додам, що знаєте, коли є вислів про те, що всі там воєначальники там чи хто готуються до минулих воєн. От, і коли почалася війна, я зрозумів, що це стосується і мене, хоча я просто активіст і редактор, але так, 8 років тому ми боялися, що російські танки підуть на Київ, але тоді це не сталося. Тоді обмежилися тільки Донбасом і Кримом. Після того, ну, я ніколи не думав, що Росія може вторгнутись отак просто без казус беллі, по суті. 8 років тому це відбувалося в умовах політичної кризи, назвімо це так. От в Україні, коли державний апарат був розхитаний, коли суспільство було поляризоване, і Росія скористалася цим. Після того я передбачав, що ну, коли це все почалося минулого року, я думав, що що Росія може піти в наступ на Донбасі. Протягом всіх цих років ми бачили той кошмар, який був в Сирії, і були періоди, коли я боявся, що і в нас це дійде. Але я думав, що Росія, ну, якби повномасштабне вторгнення можливе тільки, якщо знову ж таки буде якийсь серйозна ну, політична криза в Україні, якщо тут третій Майдан, про який багато хто говорив, і що Росія знову скористається цим. Але виявилося, що я дуже сильно помилявся. Коли західні ЗМІ почали говорити про повномасштабне вторгнення, я думав, що ну, це ж безглузда ідея, ну, повномасштабне вторгнення стане катастрофою для Росії. Путін же не настільки дурний, щоб піти на це. Виявилося, що що ми все-таки погано розуміли путінський режим і те, на що він готовий піти. Дякую. Я, мабуть, поки закінчу.
Thank you very much, Taras. This is a good segue, actually, because the follow-up question was going to be about the links between Syrians and Ukrainians. The occupation and annexation of Crimea happened 1 year before the Russian intervention and subsequent invasion of Syria. And since then, we've seen similar tactics being deployed in both Ukraine and Syria. The bombing of hospitals, the using humanitarian corridors as actual places to bomb, the online disinformation, using to some extent the exact same template that was used on Syria. Like I can name, for example, I think it was Sputnik, one of the Russian state media, saying that the Ukrainians are going to use and here I'm quoting, the known white helmets templates. And this is again Sputnik, i.e. that, you know, there's going to be a false flag attack, there's going to be some kind, they were using all of those similar discourses, and to this day, they're still using them. What, to you, what links, let me put it this way, For the Syrians here, what were your thoughts on the first few days, maybe, of the invasion or the second invasion of Ukraine end of February? And to the Ukrainians, maybe since then or even before then, how did you view the situation in Syria? And Taras, please mute yourself when you're talking, just for the noise. So I don't know who wants.
is the question, Joy?
Everyone. You can start, Yassin, since you volunteered now.
Okay, thank you. I think first of all, the same enemy. We have the same enemy. Russia as an occupation power in Syria since late September 2015. 23 Syrian civilians have been killed by Russian bombardment. Russia used cluster bombs, thermobaric munitions, and phosphorus bombs against Aleppo and against many areas in Syria. I mean, everything that we see now in Ukraine has been seen before in Syria. The same, markets and hospitals were targeted systematically after getting the information about their locations from the UN. And then this courageous, this valiant ability to lie. What amazes me more than anything is that they are very powerful in lying and in trying to convince the whole world that of their lies, that chemical weapons were never used in Syria, and there were no civilian victims, and it is the terrorists. Everyone is a terrorist in Syria, the way everyone is a Nazi in Ukraine. The terrorists did this. So Ukrainians are killing their people in Bucha and Mariupol, and as we were doing this in Syria all the time. But apart from the fact that the same enemy and the same tactics, I think the essence of the cause is one. In Syria, it was popular uprising for political change, for democracy, for justice, and we were not aware, we were not delusioned about the difficulties that we'll face if we were able to overthrow the regime. We were not able, but I mean, we were not delusioned about that things will be not easy for us after, at that time, more than 40 years of the Assad family rule and almost half a century of the Ba'athist rule on the country. In Ukraine, they have an elected government. So it is in Syria, the Russians are protecting a regime that is similar to the regime they have in Russia. In Ukraine, they are preventing, they are angry of a rather elected democratically government in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian are representing themselves. So it is crushing democracy in Ukraine, and it is preventing democracy in Syria. And of course, we have a monstrous and a traitor regime that made this possible in Syria. It started killing its people, then invited foreign powers to help to this killing, to this murder feast. Now, so in Syria, I mean, it is far more, this is not a very optimist observation. It is no more about democracy only. We lost our first independence. I mean, independence from colonialism is lost because we failed to implement our second independence, which is independent from tyranny, which is democracy. And and we see it. clearly. Now Syria is occupied, divided and occupied. It is again in Syria national liberation. It is self-determination. And this is a point that many people, I'm sorry for the translators, I am so sorry. I just, yeah, I'll try to be slow now. So
it's okay.
It is again, many people misunderstand this, and many leftists that Yulia talked about so bitterly. I understand your bitterness, dear Yulia. I'm quite bitter, but I don't think we have to spend much energy and much time on this. Though I have done actually. From time to time, I would dedicate some time and write about these issues. So what they don't understand is that it is this state, under the name of war on terror, became a continuation of colonialism with other means. It is a colonial state, which means that it is again national liberation. It is again self-determination. So it is not only democracy. First of all, we need to retrieve our country from imperialist powers, and Russia is quite imperialist. It is a shame that we have to talk about this. The main difference, however, I'll not take much time. The main difference between Syria and Ukraine is that in Ukraine, the US is the opposite side of Russia. They are not fighting the Russians. They are against no-fly zone. They will not give Ukrainian warplanes, but they are against Putin. And in a way, they are helping. In Syria, the US has been all the time another Russia. The Russian intervention in Syria has never been condemned by the US or any European power for that matter. So, and this is another source of complexity in Syria. I mean, democratic powers have never been democratic in the Middle East, in Syria or in the Middle East in general. This is a long story, and a long and ugly and nasty and disrespectable and despicable. I will not elaborate on it. But this is a main thing, a point that people should keep in their mind. In Syria, we have two Russians. One of them is called the United States of America. As if one Russia is not too much for us. There are other powers, and they are not helping Syrian people. Of course, the Iranians are another occupation power, the Israelis and the Turks. They are using Syrian proxies. So I don't know if I answered the question. Yeah, I'll not take more time.
Very much. Thank you, Yassin. I don't know who else wants to also have a go at the question. Again, it's a very general question, but essentially, to the Ukrainians here, what have been some of your reflections on Syria, either since this has started or even beforehand, maybe? And Wafa, basically the same question as to Yassin. Please, Yulia.
Yeah, I want to make kind of following up on Yassin's point to make a couple of observations. And I mentioned in my earlier comments about people with books going to countries they don't even speak languages of and trying to kind of educate the infidels with their theory gospel. Well, we have theorists like that, but we also have politicians and even regimes like that, right? So there is this kind of, I agree with the war on terror, there is this kind of neo-colonial thing going on. The spread of democracy is through air bombing by the United States. And there's been so many violations of the international law by Israel, by the United States, by France, UK, that, when Putin started breaking the facade of this international illiberal liberal order, they couldn't really say him, could they? He could sit at the Council of the UN with a smirk on his face and go, well, we're not doing anything that you haven't done. And he was right. It's not just to justify what Russia was doing, but this water has been dysfunctional for a very long time, and it has been hierarchical and reproducing certain it has been reproducing certain hierarchies in the international order since its establishment. So it was so by design. And then what I was thinking when, you know, when watching Syria in horror and the kind of organizations and countries, and then when Putin's regime started doing what it started doing in Ukraine, what to me it was looking like is that the facade of this kind of liberal international world, or how politics work, the weaknesses, or the facade of things being, of international law functioning, the facade of liberalism of functioning, the facade of some sort of rule. You know, there are lots of contradictions in how international politics have been conducted, and there's been, you know, the self-appointed spreaders of democracy, the United States, have been like the biggest bully on the block, who have been abusing the system for a very long time, and it was only a matter of time that somebody else will come up and start mimicking these things, and you know, and start exploiting certain tropes in this so-called order, like sanctity of elections, however despotic the elected person is, unless you want to misplace them with a coup, which again the United States are quite good at. You know, the monopoly of the nation state system, the monopoly of the use of violence by the state, which of course gets misused and abused all the time. That also is now being, not just now, but it has been systematically instrumentalized to legitimize the existence of despotic regimes who have usurped the power, and then when there are popular uprisings against them, then those protesters, those fighters are breaking the law, and they're terrorists, and labeled with all sorts of unsavory names. Therefore, also, and this is again, like, you know, because I have a lot of beef with international relations theory. I took, after about 6 weeks of my master's degree, I was like, this is a lot of rubbish, like what's going on? And then political economy week came by and everything fell into place. But, you know, this whole idea that somehow only certain groups have the right to determine what and how this is decided in their countries, and it has to be done through elections, and there is a kind of sanctity of that, and no matter what kind of treacherous group of people got into power and how they've changed their politics from what they said they were going to do, or however fraudulent elections were, nobody's supposed to be challenging that. And that, you know, there are a lot of flaws in that system. There is a hell of a lot of flaws in that system, and because there is that kind of so-called order is being held as some sort of sanctimonious, then it's like by design there is very little space for any sort of salvation of any people who have been systemically kept out of positions of power. On the levels of race, on the level of sex and gender, on the level of religion, ethnicity, you name it. Right, so these kind of the colonial legacy of the world, imperialistic legacy of the world, has not really gone anywhere. It's just become a little bit more dressed up, you know, with a few more frills. But I keep forgetting whose quote it is. It's weeks of bad sleep, and my brain is betraying me. But there was one of the African liberation leaders speaking of the United States, said that there is only one party in the United States, but with the American exuberance, they have two of them. So there is the kind of the facade of democracy and freedom of political determination. It is exactly there in the heart of the self-appointed spreader of democracy everywhere, who are going around like the Christian missionaries, educating infidels in how they're supposed to be living their lives, without any interest in what those people's lives want to be like. And I think like those, I do not know if what I'm saying is very consistent, but I think like to me it was this, you know, kind of the explosion of all of these contradictions and like bearing them in the international system, like those who actually are under these facades of democracy and elections and freedom, they kind of, that facade is slipping, and it becomes more and more impossible every day to pretend that the system is functioning. And I think in that, like, and this is what the hope, like in this whole kind of, in the core of the myriad of international conflicts, there is a hope that with every next one, it becomes more difficult to pretend that the system actually is fit for purpose, and hopefully some sort of challenge can materialize. Challenge to it can materialize into something qualitatively different. But that's yeah, that hope is still there. I'm not going to tell you how strong or weak it is, because I don't want to spoil anybody's mood. But there is a bit of a hope.
Thank you, Yulia. I don't know if Wafa Taras wants to also have a go at it. Up to you. Taras? Yeah.
Ну, я можу, якщо вам. Ну, по-перше, я хотів сказати, що ну, я не так багато знаю про Сирію, на жаль. І те, що я бачив, те, як висвітлювали західні ЗМІ, там, події в Україні останні 8 років і війну на Донбасі, зокрема, навчило мене обережно говорити про конфлікти в інших країнах, якщо ти добре не розбираєшся. Тому що те, що писали якби люди з Заходу, які не сильно розбираються в місцевому контексті, іноді було просто важко читати. Тому, на жаль, мені важко порівнювати, бо я не так добре знаю ситуацію там. Але якщо все-таки спробувати порівняти, я говорив, що Майдан і Сирійська революція якоюсь мірою були з однієї хвилі масових протестів у світі. Але у нас було набагато простіше, скажімо так, завдання, ніж у сирійців. У Сирії авторитарний режим був 50 років, існував, і сім'я Асада просто приватизувала країну. А в Україні, по суті, авторитарний режим тільки намагалися створити, і в Януковича це не вийшло. Ми ми повалили авторитарний режим ще на стадії його формування. З іншого боку, те, що якби для нас якоюсь мірою урок Сирії в тому числі, а що було б, якби тоді все пішло інакше, якби Янукович не втік, і Росія відкрито, після перемоги Майдану, Росія відкрито підтримала його і намагалася повернути його до влади. І це в тому числі якби для нас урок, що, знаєте, в Україні багато хто після Майдану був розчарований результатами Майдану. Постмайданівський, багато надій, з якими люди виходили на вулиці і боролися проти режиму Януковича, багато надій не справдилися. Але тут треба порівнювати не лише з тим, що було до того, але і з тим, а що могло бути, якби все пішло інакше. І насправді нам тут не треба навіть далеко шукати. Сирія – це жахливий випадок, але у нас під боком Білорусь, де знову ж таки авторитарний режим за підтримки Росії придушив народне повстання. І слава Богу, у нас не так вийшло. Знову ж таки, Ясін згадував про те, що Росія використовує у своїй пропаганді в Сирії і в Україні схоже підходить, що от в Сирії всі терористи, а в Україні всі нацисти. З іншого боку, якоюсь мірою, в обох випадках, от в цих повстаннях брали участь і сили, які нам не подобалися. В Україні справді є ультраправі, в Сирії справді є джихадисти, але питання в тому, як Росія через збільшуване скло показує саме цю частину учасників протесту і подає, що от вони, якби ті, хто складають тільки частину цього масового протесту, що от вони якби представляють всіх. Я ще хотів відреагувати на те, що говорив Ясін про США і Росію. В Сирії їхня роль одна, в Україні інша, тому що Україна протягом десятиліть була між західним і російським імперіалізмами. Але, знаєте, в перші дні, десь через тиждень після початку війни, я був в Києві, мені написав один західний лівий журналіст і запропонував інтерв'ю дати йому. Я з цікавості все-таки пішов, якщо людина в такій ситуації приїхала в Київ, де зараз тут уже відносно спокійно, люди з кожним днем все більше повертаються, вже машини їздять і так далі, а в той момент це ще на вулицях майже не було людей. І я з цікавості пішов, але, на жаль, журналіст виявився повним ідіотом, і він приїхав у Київ і почав мені розказувати про те, що Америка – це все-таки головна загроза, а Росія – це все-таки менший імперіалізм, вона не настільки страшна, і т.д. Юля говорила про те, що про недоліки цієї ліберальної демократії, але, ми зараз бачимо, що відбувається в Росії, де, там багато років вже авторитарний режим, але з початком, після початку війни, власне, і з придушенням антивоєнного руху, це перетворилося вже чим далі, тим ближче до відкритого фашистського режиму. Путін використовує приклади Іраку і щоб виправдати своє вторгнення в Україну, але я не пригадую, щоб американські журналісти під час війни в Іраку писали статті про те, що іракців треба деіракізувати і виправдовували, по суті, плани геноциду. В Росії журналісти пишуть таке. Тому при всіх, знаєте, коли я писав свій лист до західних лівих, це було на другий день війни, я ще до кінця не переосмислив усе у світлі того, що відбувалося, але зараз, оглядаючись назад, якщо тоді я дивився на те, що відбувається загалом, швидше ще як протистояння більш-менш рівнозначних імперіалізмів, але для України це однозначно є один імперіалістичний агресор, і ми йому чинимо опір. То зараз я думаю, що те, що робили США і вторгнення в Ірак і все інше, це однозначно злочини, і однозначно там варто боротися за те, щоб були міжнародні трибунали і це все засудили, але якоюсь мірою це має таке саме значення зараз, як і британський і французький і колоніалізми на початку Другої світової війни. Нам нікому не треба було підтримувати британський і французький імперіалізм, щоб підтримати війну, власне, союзників проти нацистської Німеччини. І так само і зараз. лівим не треба підтримувати американський імперіалізм, щоб підтримати поставки зброї Україні і вимагати посилення санкцій. Я думаю, це те, що прогресивна громадськість має робити і має вимагати. Зараз зовсім інше. При цьому ми розуміємо, що з тим самим міжнародним трибуналом, якого ми б хотіли для Путіна і для загалом російських воєнних злочинців, США, Британія і Франція, мабуть, неохоче будуть сприяти створенню міжнародного трибуналу, тому що це може бути потім використано як прецедент проти їхніх злочинів. Так само ми всі бачимо, як Росія використовує право вето в Раді безпеки ООН, і при цьому розуміємо, що буде важко змусити США щось змінити з цим, тому що вони теж користуються цим правом вето. Вони хочуть зберегти своє привілейоване становище. Але я все-таки сподіваюся, що, можливо, ми зараз в ситуації, коли міжнародний порядок заснований на правилах у найбільшій кризі за багато десятиліть. Але мені здається водночас, що зараз, вперше за багато десятиліть водночас є шанс, наприклад, справді змінити ООН і зробити щось із цим правом вето в Раді безпеки ООН. І для цього треба міжнародний тиск. Яскравий приклад – це те, що вперше за 40 років після початку російського вторгнення в Україну була застосована резолюція ООН «Єдність заради миру», і питання України було перенесено з Ради безпеки на Генасамблею. Це те, чого, я так розумію, сирійська опозиція вимагає вже не перший рік, але сирійцям не вдалося цього добитися. Я думаю, тут якоюсь мірою Україні і прогресивній громадськості загалом зараз якраз момент, коли треба тиснути на західні уряди і щоб вони зробили, все-таки пішли на цей крок. Я, мабуть, все. Дякую за увагу.
Thank you, Taras. Wafa, do you want to have a go at it as well?
Yeah, the three of them said mainly everything I wanted to say, but I wanted to share something more. 2 years ago, I also didn't really know much about Ukraine before I left Syria. 2 years ago, during the pandemic, I watched Winter on Fire, which is the film by Netflix that actually documented the revolution in the Maidan in 2013. And especially after the revolutions, especially after I fled, I am interested in films, and I watched many things, on similar fights for freedom and liberation movements, and I think I can honestly say that was one of the most intense, relevant, powerful, and touching things I've ever seen. I was aside from all that, from the fact that it is actually beautifully shot. It is very honest, very powerful, but I think the main point was that it's very similar to what I know. They're speaking different language. They are in a different geography, but it feels so similar. The boy that said, I've never went to school, but now the Maidan is my school. The activist who was one of the first activists to be shot in the Maidan, and the collective sadness, the collective grief of this activist, the way people organized themselves in the Maidan. this is, I mean, this is not just, you know, this is not something I take for granted. And this is not something I see and I watch as a film and then I just forget about. It stayed with me. But today, more than ever, it also, to be honest, because I watched this one film and I learned a little bit more about Ukraine and I saw actually their fight, their longing for freedom, their power, their strength, their sacrifices. Now, when that's one reason that made it even more difficult for me now when the invasion started, because it's not only you know, a war that has just started. To me, it felt like a place that I know, and it just immediately came to my mind, all the places I've seen, all the faces I've seen on that film, and because at that point when I watched that, as Taras said, I was very happy that it was not like Syria. And I'm being completely honest, I was very, very happy. I was even more, you know, it gave me hope. I was very happy that, and I was even more hopeful that, yes, one day we might go back to Syria, we might take over squares and Maidans again, and we might also achieve what Ukraine achieved. Well, I mean, so that also made it even more difficult for me now when the invasion started. But to be honest, also one main point was that it made me feel that that I'm losing hope on Syria, because I thought that, you know, I felt that we were pushing Syria's case a move forward. You know, I thought that, you know, with the support of other people, we would just move it a step forward. But then now, everything that we actually, I mean, in the past few years, we've been, as activists, we've been talking about the danger of normalizing Assad regime, the danger of letting Assad go away with his crimes, the danger of not stopping Russia. And it's not only, and we said many, and it's very sad that now I'm saying this, but we said that it's not only about Syrians. You don't care. You thought Syria is very far. You thought Syrians are very uncivilized. You don't care about them. Well, first, they are here now. They're in Europe. They live in your country. And they're here and they're loud. And they don't stop and they're not keeping silent. But unfortunately, it's crazy that politicians in governments did not know that not stopping Russia in 2015 and not stopping Assad regime sent a clear message to Putin and to all dictatorships all over the planet that please do whatever you want, bomb your own citizens, use chemical weapons against them, kill them, detain them, besiege them, it's fine. You will just be called a president, you will be welcomed. Sometimes we would just release a statement saying that we don't accept that and this is not fine and you are violating human rights, and we will take actual steps. 11 years after that, we're still just seeing raised eyebrows, empty statements, empty words, and nothing has changed. And this even makes me more angry, unfortunately. But as I'll conclude by saying that, as Taras said, this is why I'm more determined now, not only because, I mean, I believe in general that our fights are connected all over the planet. You know, some people tell me that this is very romantic idea of fighting for freedom. And unfortunately, Ukraine proved that it's not that romantic. It is practical and it is realistic, because we would have maybe not seen what is happening in Ukraine today if Russia was stopped a few years ago. And today, if we need to stop Russia in Ukraine, we need to prosecute Russia and Putin for their crimes, because that will definitely move Syria's case a step forward, and that will definitely prevent Putin and prevent other dictators and other tyrants all over the planet from thinking that they can still commit crimes and get away with it.
Thank you so much, Wafa. And I think this is especially prescient since we've seen the exact same commanders that have committed crimes in Syria now are actually being sent in the battlefield in Ukraine. I forgot the name, but one of the major commanders was one of them, and we've seen many photos and footage of soldiers, Russian soldiers who were in Syria who are now physically in Ukraine. We're gonna slowly, or rather quickly wrap it up, sorry, not wrap it up, but wind down, because we have about 25 minutes and we're going to include a couple of questions as well. So before doing that, I'll just ask you a question that it's broad and it's gonna be very difficult, but if possible, stick to like 2 or 3 minutes, just so we give time to the rest, which is the following. What are the possibilities for association and collaboration in the future? We've spoken about all of the problems, we've spoken about, you know, missed opportunities, maybe we might say, and so on and so forth, between Ukrainian and Syrians and between the rest of the world, obviously. But now what can we do? What are maybe practical, what are hopeful suggestions, or what have you? And let me know if this wasn't clear. If it is clear, Yulia, if it's okay, you can start.
Just kind of a general wrap up. Well, I kind of wanted to speak to some of the things that were raised before, and like some of the things that I thought of saying, but I kind of didn't. I think kind of I got carried away otherwise. Like, you know, because I agree, Wafa, with what you've just said, that, you know, every time there is a war, every time there are atrocities, every time there are these violations of rights, and the only thing that follows is a warning and a stern condemnation. There is further enabling of further violence, and there is not just that, there is emboldening of the perpetrators of that violence. And we have seen that with Putin, we've seen that with Assad, we've seen that with the United States, we've seen that with the Israeli government, we've seen that with all sorts of different regimes, right? The list goes on. And I agree that, you know, the current stage of war of Russia against Ukraine, because again, we're in the beginning of the 9th year and now, that could have been prevented. The kind of the strength of reaction that we're seeing now, we should have been seeing in 2014. Why was it acceptable to chop off parts of Donbass and Crimea? But how much? And you know, we had a resurfacing of that kind of discussion before the actual the next wave of invasion that started on the 24th of February. Where we've seen comments coming out from the United States saying that if there is only a minor incursion into Ukraine, that there will be these consequences. If there is major, then there is those. And you think, well, first of all, there's already been an incursion that's 8 years old, and it was called war. And also, we thought that there is this kind of international order where the borders are sanctimonious. We're not violating the borders, that's a no-no. And now all of a sudden it looks like there is some sort of gradation scale that a certain amount of land is somehow okay to take, and then the rest, or certain types of weapons are okay to use. So like, you know, so can we at least have a chart of how many women is it okay to rape, and how many civilians is it okay to kill, and how many houses is it okay to bomb, so we can at least have some clarity. I'm obviously being sarcastic because it boils my blood listening to this, and like, you know, and it was for a long time. And the current atrocities could have been prevented should there actually have been proper action. And you know, I normally, like, it will be 18 years in September since I've been living in the UK. I'm in Ukraine right now, but I'm normally in the UK, and I've seen that, you know, like the audiences with the Queen that are being held for leaders, so-called leaders, or heads rather, of states who persecute and execute people publicly, and who perpetuate war crimes and selling weapons to them. So selling weapons to murderous regimes is okay, but giving weapons to people who are trying to protect themselves from those regimes, that is somehow morally reprehensible, right? That is just, it really doesn't make any sense to me. And you know, another thing I wanted to say, because I think it's very important. I was having a conversation with with an activist friend yesterday about this, that there are all of these kind of frames of understanding these conflicts, and Taras, you spoke to that a bit as well. You always play, you try to think in the, we're trying to think in kind of in old conflicts, you expect that the next one will be similar. So, but we sometimes tend to, I don't know who I'm referring to, but there is a tendency to look for familiar, because that's how we're wired, right? We try to make sense of something that doesn't make sense in front of us. But what we are seeing over and we need to look into intersectionality and interdisciplinarity properly. When we look at, I think Oksana Shavel, a scholar of Ukraine, have mentioned it. I've been thinking along those lines, and I tend to agree. When we look at these kind of politics of entitlement that colonial and neocolonial powers have, we need to go almost to kind of frameworks of domestic violence and psychology, psychiatry, where there is this kind of psychological warfare, there is belittling, there is demoralizing manhood, there is victim blaming, so there is violence against people and countries and social groups and ethnicities and sexes and genders, and then they're being blamed, and then the victim is being blamed for the violence that's being caused to them. And we saw that with Syria, and I'm obviously less familiar with the situation, but we see a lot of that in Ukraine, where somehow Ukrainians forced almost Russia to come and bomb its cities. Abusive relationships patterns, that makes sense, and that in that framework it makes sense, right? The sense of entitlement, the inability, and a combination of inability and unwillingness to accept that you do not have a right over the other person or country or city. That is something that we need to be also thinking about. And we saw that actually in this kind of international discussions about what to do with Ukraine, that we need to appease Putin and give him a bit more of Ukrainian territory. But what does that even mean? You do not appease a bully. Why? When did it become acceptable? But also I've read it from some leftists, and I heard it from the Stop the War coalition and some Ukrainian so-called leftists, that maybe some territory is okay to give away to Russia as long as it preserves civilian lives. And I'm like, wait a minute, no. First of all, that's already happened, and we know what happened in those territories. We know the persecution, we know the torture, we know the kidnappings, we know the destruction of industry and environment. But also, I'm sorry, how are we going to decide which Ukrainian cities and which Ukrainians is it okay to give away to Russia? How are we even having this conversation? It is not okay, and it pains me to see the destruction that is happening in my country today. But I also understand that it is an existential fight, and if we do not push Putin's army out, there will be more recurring and more wars and more fighting and more suffering. And I agree, Wafa, you hit the nail on the head. If Putin's army were stopped in 2014, we wouldn't be discussing this war right now, because it wouldn't have happened. And the international so-called community of leaders have failed in this instance. It's not the only one, and I'm aware of that very painfully. But in this specific case, there was a systematic failure. There was a failure, and it's very systematic and emblematic of myriads of failures. And I hope with my friend Taras in a uniform, because he shouldn't be in the military, he should be doing his amazing scholarly work. Right. Sorry, Taras, I didn't want to put you on the spot. Sorry. It's getting late and I'm getting emotional here.
No, it's understandable. And Yulia, thanks a lot for this. If I can ask the others, we have about 15 minutes and we're going to include at least one question from the audiences. Just kind of your final thoughts, I guess, wrap up as much as you can. I don't know who wants to start. Wafa, I guess you can start. Or Taras, please go for it. And then Wafa and then Yassin.
Дякую. Я спробую коротко. Я згоден з Вафою, що, мабуть, головне, чим українці можуть зараз допомогти сирійцям, це перемогти у цій війні, і може, якби це змінить міжнародну ситуацію і дасть можливість змінити щось і в Сирії. Але водночас я думаю, що один із головних, якоюсь мірою наш обов'язок зараз, в момент, коли стільки уваги було приділено на міжнародному рівні Україні, наш обов'язок якось і посилити ваш голос і нагадати про Сирію, наскільки це можливо. У нас не так багато можливостей для цього, але я думаю, тут в першу чергу ви маєте нам сказати, як ми можемо вам допомогти, як ми можемо посилити ваш голос, які вимоги ваші ми можемо підтримати, і так далі. І останнє, я хотів відреагувати на репліку Ясіна про те, що не треба намагатися переконати західних антиімперіалістів, які далі пишуть всякі ідіотські тексти. Я з ним все-таки не згоден, тому що якоюсь мірою когось ми не переконаємо, але просто в Україні ліві доволі слабкі і маргінальні. І одна з причин, чого я все-таки писав той лист до західних лівих, в тому, що я все-таки вірю, що нам треба подолати капіталізм, і глобальний соціалістичний рух має бути тим суб'єктом, який має це здійснити. І на західних лівах лежить велика відповідальність. І нам треба щось зробити з цими ідіотами, щоб вони щось зрозуміли. І якби ми тут слабкі, але вони це найбільша аудиторія якоюсь мірою, для якої наше слово має хоча б якесь значення, і нам треба з одного боку намагатись переконати їх, а з іншого боку, я думаю, всі ці, я можу сказати, що для мене були дуже корисними тексти, власне, Ясіна, Лейли Аль-Шамі, які допомогли краще зрозуміти проблеми з цим. І я думаю, з іншого боку, нам треба формувати новий інтернаціоналізм тим, хто в схожій ситуації, хто стикається зі схожими упередженнями з боку західних лівих. Це не лише українці і сирійці. Гонконг, учасники протестів в Гонконгу так само стикалися з, м'яко кажучи, неправильним ставленням до них з боку західних лівих, і в інших країнах також, там, де люди борються з антизахідними авторитарними режимами, я думаю, нам треба розвивати з ними діалог, тому що поки що, на жаль, навіть через ієрархічність світової системи, і навіть про Ясіна, наприклад, і про інших мислителів з глобального півдня, де українці можуть дізнатися про них, все одно в західних медіа. Це більш-менш те, що я хотів сказати. Дякую.
Shall I go?
Yes, please, Wafa. Sorry, I had an internet issue. Go for it.
Okay. I mean, I think I wanted to say something. Yesterday, I was also contacted by a journalist, and he asked me, why do you, is it important for Ukrainians and Syrians to get connected? And how would they do that? And I think, I said that it's not important. There is no other option for us but to get connected and to work together and to support each other. There is no way out of this. Not only the current situation today in Ukraine, there is no way out of this absurdity and this brutality that we've been witnessing for the past, I don't know, couple of decades, unless we come together, get to know each other, and support each other. I think first and foremost, we need, as Tara said, and as I said, we didn't really know much about each other before I don't know, couple of years ago. And I think most importantly, as Yassin said, that yes, the situation in Syria is complex, obviously, but this should not be your way to say that I'm out of politics and I cannot do that because it's too complicated. Well, everything is complicated, but there are Syrian activists, there are Ukrainian activists who actually dedicate their lives to make things easier for you. So listen to activists, listen to Syrians, and listen to Ukrainians. I think already I'm based in Berlin, and this is my way to invite everyone who's in Berlin to come to the demo we have on Saturday, because, and this is again one of the crazy narratives we have today, we have on Saturday a protest invitation by the Berlin, called the Berlin Easter March, where they actually invite people to come together and demand peace with Russia. Yes, it's that crazy and that absurd. And we are going on another protest on the same day as Syrian activists, Ukrainians, and people and activists from Belarus, to say that it's not that shallow, it's not that stupid. There is no way for peace, for sustainable peace, unless there is first to stop the ongoing crimes and to prosecute all war criminals. And there is no way that any peace can be achieved if it does not center the victims of these wars. So we are, at least, let me say that, for example, in Berlin, and I know this is the case in many places, Syrians and Ukrainians are coming together. They're getting to know each other. They're supporting each other. They're organizing protests and events. They're trying to help each other in every possible way. And this is the first step. But this is what, unfortunately, I hope it doesn't sound very pessimistic, but if one thing I learned after 11 years is that it's a very, very, very long fight. And I came to the point where I am satisfied and convinced that I might not see Syria as a free democratic country anytime. Maybe not even the next generation will do so. But this is fine, because I know that what we are fighting against is that brutal and that criminal. And I know that the world that we live in is that absurd. But I think we fight today together. Ukraine is fighting today, every day, and we are still fighting in our own way, maybe in a different, less bombing, less clashes, but each of us from their own position, because we know that there is no way that brutality and tyrannies and dictatorships will last. There is no way they will rule us forever. There is no way that we will keep being slaves for capitalism, for imperialism, and for dictatorships. There is no way that this is gonna just be the reality of next generations. And I think this is, to me at least, this is a fair enough hope that keeps me fighting on daily basis. I think that now, in my own way, I'm also trying to, and this is my final point, most importantly, not only that we're only fighting against the same enemy, but we are fighting against an enemy that is Russia. And when it comes to Russia, propaganda is not just one aspect of their war against us. And on daily basis, at least when it comes to my personal life, on daily basis, I fight to convince people that my dad is not a terrorist, and my dad is not ISIS, and my dad does not deserve to be somewhere between life and death, and that I am that I deserve, and my family deserves to know where he is being held and why he is being disappeared for all these years. And I think that what we're doing today, for example, being here, is a one step to inform each other, but also to fight against this narrative. Because I mean, at least in Syria today, maybe the war on the ground is over somehow, but the battle over narratives is still ongoing. And this is the least we can do to fight against it and to present a counter narrative to that of Russia and and other dictatorships.
Thank you, Wafa. Yassin, so we have exactly 4 minutes. I give you 3 of them so that the organizers can wrap up in the end, if that's okay with you.
Thank you, Joy. It's okay. So the first thing is, as Tara said, please win the war. This will be good for us. First of all, it will be good for you. It will be good for us, not as good as it will be for you, because yeah, I said before, because we have 2 Russias, and but things will be less bad for us if Putin is defeated, and it will be not least important, good for Russia. There are many courageous people, many decent and honorable people that are against Putinism and against this machine of war and lies and propaganda, and the defeat of Putinism will be good for them. Second, yeah, the more networking, the more common spaces we share, whether in rallies like the one the day after tomorrow in Berlin. Unfortunately, I will not be a lot prepared because I'll not be in Berlin. But yeah, these are the activities that should go on, and maybe we create spaces. We don't have a Ukrainian Syrian space. We need a space, an online site, meetings from time to time, where we are here in Berlin, mostly in Berlin actually, but in other places in France and the UK and the US, wherever we can, and hopefully someday in Kiev or in Damascus. I heard today actually about there was a material about some Syrian refugees in Germany who went to Ukraine. They took in a bus, they took some stuff, food, maybe medicines, I am not quite sure, and they brought back refugees. This is amazing. This is a very good thing, symbolic, but it is courageous. And so these are the activities that we need, and just to keep contacting each other and talking to each other and listening, of course.
Thank you so much, Yassin. Daniel, I don't know if the team wants to take over to kind of conclude. I can't actually see anyone now. There you go. Hi, Sab.
Hi, Joey. Hi, everyone. I just want to close the space by thanking Joey, Yassin, Wafa, Taras, and Yulia for holding the space with such dignity, a space of care, a space of listening, a space where people joined us from all over the world, because we know that, as Wafa just reminded us, we fight, but we fight together. I want to thank you for the openings and the spaciousness to have conversations that are rooted in pain, but that still give us hope. Hope of winning, as you all highlighted, hope of building power from below against imperialism in all its expressions. And I also want to thank you for helping us to make sense of the current realities that you face and that we all face by sitting with the complexity and inviting us to learn from each other. I think seeing the rich discussions that have happened in the chat, I also want to name that this conversation has opened up the possibility of talking about other conflicts and other sites of struggle, Ethiopia, Yemen, Haiti, to name a few. But with those opportunities for conversation, also the opportunities for association and for peace, to continue to build bridges from pain. I want to thank our interpreters I'm going to name them so you know who they are. Mikhailo Turianitsia, Yana Dusak, who are interpreting into Ukrainian, Carla Davidson and Maria Jose Castro, who are interpreting into Spanish, Christine Reyes and Jocelyn Mugams, who are interpreting into Arabic, and Sasha Komarova and Marina Mintsikovska, who are interpreting into Russian. Thank you for your commitment to linguistic justice and your brilliance. And finally, I want to thank all of you, our audience, for being here today. As Joey already mentioned, there were over 200 people who joined us. Thank you for your time and your energy for bringing that presence, which highlights the importance of dialogue and connection. And just to reiterate that we are going to continue building the conversation of today. There'll be an email with the recordings and links to the incredible work and the ways in which we can support the struggles that were named today and the different spaces in which or opportunities in which we can do that. And we'll be taking up the ideas about how is it that we can continue building this container to have more of these conversations, have more of these exchanges, and build that deep association that's needed, that's been named between Syrians and Ukrainians. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to our wonderful, incredible, powerful speakers. You have moved us all very much today.
Thank you, everyone.